Nursery rhymes have long been a staple of childhood around the world. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, these short poems and catchy tunes, often used to lull children to sleep or teach lessons, became largely synonymous with the fictional author Mother Goose, whose origins likely lay in France before the character was adapted for a wider English-speaking audience. But while many people associate nursery rhymes with happy childhood memories, the stories behind some of the most popular nursery rhymes may be far darker than they appear. Take Ring Around the Rosie, for example. Initially, the song and its accompanying dance seem innocent enough, but why the line about ashes and the subsequent line, we all fall down? As these questions were probed by a larger and larger audience, particularly as the internet age came about, rumors began to circulate that this silly little children's song may not be so silly after all. Curious theorists have wondered whether Ring Around the Rosie could be a reference to a plague. The ring mentioned in the song that they have suggested might reference the rings that appear on infected skin. The ashes, they say, could refer to the burning of infected bodies, and the connection between the line, "we all fall down," and death needs little explanation. And Ring Around the Rosie is far from the only nursery rhyme to purportedly hide a darker meaning beneath its innocent surface. Some have claimed that the Muffin Man actually tells the tale of a serial killer, that Humpty Dumpty may refer to clumsy drunks, that three blind mice might symbolically represent the mass murder of Protestants under the reign of Queen Mary I, aka Bloody Mary, and that London Bridge is falling down could be a reference to a horrible method of execution. But is there any truth to these theories? After all, these nursery rhymes have been passed down from generation to generation, translated into numerous languages, adapted for various audiences, and retold orally for decades before they were ever written down. Who knows what may have been distorted and lost in translation over the centuries? While the origins of many nursery rhymes are hard to discern, there is still a good amount of historical evidence that can clear up at least some of the misconceptions, and thankfully, the alleged dark truths behind many nursery rhymes aren't nearly as dark as some would have you believe. You are listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And today, we're diving into the hidden histories and meanings behind some of the world's most famous nursery rhymes.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, this one's fun to talk about, because I think I mentioned, it's been a while now since we recorded the last one, but I mentioned last time that, you know, we talk a lot about like, the dark meaning behind certain fairy tales, especially, I think the big ones, Ring Around the Rosie. And it turns out might not be necessarily the case. These might not actually be as dark as people have claimed over the years, and we'll kind of, we'll get into that. So to start that off, I think the natural place to start would be Ring Around the Rosie.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure anyone listening would be familiar with the rhyme, but just in case you need a little refresher, the common American version of this rhyme is: ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
Yeah, that's what I learned.
Yeah, apparently there's a different version that's common throughout England. The British version is ring a ring of roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down.
Oh, ashes does seem darker than tissue. Ashes, ashes.
Right. And I think that's where we start to get this like kind of confused, allegedly dark meaning from, is the words ashes, which it does stand out as a weird like...
Yeah, it's like death and fire. And
yeah, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the rest of the rhyme. It's like, ring around the rosy. We've got flowers in our pockets. Ashes. What? It's like...
And then we all fall down. Yeah.
Right.
Tissues.
Yeah. So people have made this connection, alleging that the rhyme could be about the Great Plague of London. That's like the biggest one that I was finding, which was an outbreak of the bubonic plague in 1665 in London. I was trying to find like when that interpretation of this started, One big thing that came up was like an article from the Londonist from the like early 2000s. The writer was James Fitzgerald. He mentions the discrepancy between the lines a tissue, and ashes, ashes.
Oh, I see. A tissue is not like a tissue paper. It's like a sneeze, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
A tissue.
A tissue.
Like a chew.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Some people have said the rings, the first part, ring a roses or ring around the Rosie, whatever version of it you're familiar with. The rings could be a reference to the deadly ringed rashes that were caused on people's skin by the bubonic plague, which I was not aware was a thing.
Me neither.
But it evidently was. Posies were apparently seen as a preventative measure against the plague.
Because of like their smell or?
Carried as a protection and to ward off the smell of the disease.
Gross. The smell of the disease. That's very grim.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant, anyway, that's one interpretation. The bubonic plague, Great Plague of London, 1665. Others have dated it back further, saying it might refer to the Black Death of 14th century England, and the American version of it, ashes, ashes, referring to the burning of dead bodies. Because back then, so many people were dying. What are we going to do with all these bodies? We have to burn them.
Yeah, that'll kind of make sense.
It does until you start to look into it more, because cremation in England was banned after the end of Roman rule, and that lasted until the 1880s.
Wow.
So that covers both of those plagues, which means they weren't really burning bodies to clear up space.
They'd make an exception for like all these people dying and...
Not that I could find.
Wow.
There's also just like, I read 2 versions of the rhyme now, but there are more than that. And there's a lot of inconsistencies between all of these versions, which just kind of muddies the waters, because if this was about a plague and like mass death, it'd be kind of weird to have drastically different versions of the rhyme. Not to say there couldn't be like small discrepancies, because these were passed along orally for a while. It's a little bit of like a game of telephone. Things might change. But then there are other versions of it that don't include any references to anything remotely plague-like, like this one that goes, a ring of roses, a pocket full of posies, one for Jack and one for Jim and one for little Moses, a churchy in and a churchy out and a churchy all together.
Huh. Yeah, that's pretty different.
Yeah, one, the flow of it is terrible. It's
Posies
not
and
as
Moses
good.
is a stretch for a rhyme, I think.
Yeah, and thus maybe like you have like the right accent.
Roses and Moses, yeah.
Where they don't, I don't know. The churchy in and the churchy out and a churchy all together is kind of weird as well. But like I said, drastically different. There's no, we talk about ring of roses there and a pocket full of posies. That's the only consistency between this version and the other ones. And granted, the poem's called Ring of Roses or Ring Around the Rosie, depending on where you are. So that part kind of needs to be in there.
Right, yeah.
Beyond that, it's a little bit different. One folklorist named Stephen Winnick wrote that in many versions then, the roses and the posies signify what flowers often signify in traditional European culture. Not suffering and death, but joy and love. It's a playful like song and dance, which I think is the other component, which I'll talk about here in a second. The other components of this is the fact that when children would sing this, they hold hands, they dance around in a circle, and then they all fall onto their backs at the end.
Yeah, which is it could be interpreted as being morbid, that the falling at the end of the rhyme.
Yeah, all the children die. But
yeah, exactly.
There is a not morbid explanation for that as well. The first time anyone really mentioned this connection between this nursery rhyme and a plague was in 1961. This author named James Leeser published his book, The Plague and the Fire. That came out 80 years after the nursery rhyme was first published in print. We're like 1882, I think, 1880s.
That's so interesting. So it was not published until the 1880s. It was just like repeated over time before that.
Right. It was, passed along as an oral tradition, which could make up for some of the differences between versions of it.
Right.
But there's another really interesting part to this as well, which might explain why the rhyme became so popular. And that is that throughout a large portion of the 19th century, at least here in America, there were a lot of Protestant bans on dancing
like Footloose.
Yeah. 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 And that was before we had the dude, Kevin Bacon.
Oh,
Kevin Bacon to save us. So,
to save us.
but Ring Around the Rosie might have been a kind of way for children to get around these dancing bands because it wasn't really seen as a dance. It was what they called a play party. So children could sing this little song, dance around, and like be kids about it, but not technically be dancing.
Huh. Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, obviously, a lot of this is up for interpretation. Nursery rhymes at the end of the day are still a form of poetry, so there is no really clear meaning to it. But most folklorists agree that there's really not a super strong connection between Ring Around the Rosie and the plague, and that it was more likely just like kind of a goofy rhyme people made up that blew up in popularity.
That's interesting. So I feel like, I mean, it's like you said, it's all speculation. And if this was like an oral tradition passed down for hundreds of years, it seems like anything's sort of possible. Like it could be.
Right.
The one thing, the cremation thing is the one like sticking point, at least for the ashes version.
Right. And I also think the original, they can't really trace it back to like when exactly this rhyme started. Because again, it wasn't published in print until the late 19th century. But I think versions of it predate both of those plagues as well.
Oh, interesting.
Or at least there was like a theory that maybe they did. So yeah, you can kind of connect it to that, but also there's no need to like panic. You know, I remember when I first heard like what Ring Around the Rosie is really about. And I was like, oh my God, we just sing that as kids? That's insane. But
right,
really
yeah. It's actually maybe not so
big a
dark.
deal. Yeah.
Huh. Very interesting.
And we're going to see kind of a recurring theme as we go through this, a very similar applying a dark interpretation to something that like really wasn't dark originally. This next one's a very good example of that.
Yes.
The Muffin Man, which I was just thinking of that one scene from Shrek with the little gingerbread man.
Oh, right.
Crying about the Muffin Man. But
it's so funny whenever you say the names Ring Around the Rosie and Muffin Man, I immediately like hear the rhyme in my head, even though it must have been like 20 years since.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so catchy. Like,
and they're short.
Yeah. They're for kids, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's not going to be super complicated.
But the Muffin Man rhyme. Do you know the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man, the Muffin Man? Do you know the Muffin Man who lives in Drury Lane? Nothing about it on the surface seems dark, right?
No.
It's just like, hey, this guy makes muffins. Do you know the Muffin Man?
Right. Or really likes muffins or something.
Everybody likes muffins.
Everyone does.
Everyone likes muffins. And that's a fact. I will not hear otherwise. But there is this really fascinating interpretation of it where some people say the rhyme refers to a prolific 16th century murderer named Frederick Thomas Linwood, who allegedly lured victims by pulling a muffin down the road. I'm sorry, it's like not funny, but it is. Pulling a muffin down the road on a string. Hence the name, the Muffin Man.
That's like quite a way, quite a motive, or not a motive, but an MO to be like, I'm going to put a muffin on a string and pull it.
It's very cartoonish also.
Very cartoonish, yeah.
Like no one in real life, well, I mean, maybe kids aren't the smartest, right?
You think they would follow a muffin on a
I don't know.
String?
I don't know. One, I'm not eating a random muffin laying in the street.
Right.
But I'm also alive in 2024, not 1500s France.
Sure.
So I don't think it is France. I think it was England.
Is he British? Also, I'm pretty sure I remember writing about this for the site. By muffin, I think he means like biscuits. I'm sure it's not like an American muffin. It's something else, but I don't remember what it is.
Sure, yeah, like how a English chip is different. And
right, exactly.
Yeah.
An English muffin. Yeah. Okay, that's obvious. Yeah.
Right.
I was like biscuits, scones. It's that thing that's exactly the same, but an English muffin.
Yeah, an English muffin. Right.
Yeah.
Obviously. Wow.
Which I love because I have Eggs Benedict all the time and English muffins. But.
Yeah. I mean, regardless, whether it's an American muffin or an English muffin, if it's lying on the street and someone's pulling it on a string, that's regardless a weird modus operandi.
Right. Very weird.
But This one, we do have a little bit more of an origin to it. The Muffin Man rhyme was first written down in 1820 as a call and response rhyme. At that point in time, Londoners were buying a lot of food from street vendors because they were working so much, up to 12 hours per day. And also just a lot of people lacked kitchens at home. There was it was a huge industrial time. Homes were being put up quickly and tight together and not in the best conditions. So people were just buying food when they were out. And it's more likely that somebody just wrote this like, hey, do you know the Muffin Man is like hey, we're all going out. We're all buying muffins from the Muffin Man because that's the only way we're getting food.
Cute little rhyme about overwork and yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. The alleged quote unquote true story suggests that hundreds of years prior to this rhyme ever existing, one vendor, a street vendor, was the aforementioned Frederick Thomas Linwood. Linwood was allegedly dubbed the Drury Lane Dicer, and some claim he was the earliest documented serial killer in England. Supposedly, he was never caught by police and died in 1612 after choking on a dumpling.
Not a muffin, though? A dumpling?
I wish.
Maybe he hated muffins because he was around them like all the time. So he didn't eat them himself.
The dumpling man.
Yeah. Muffin man is more of a ring to it, I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. We love alliteration.
We do.
The interesting thing about this version of the interpretation of the Muffin Man rhyme is that, yeah, there is a Drury Lane in London, but there is no evidence that Frederick Thomas Linwood was a real person who ever existed, which is pretty damning when you're trying to say that this rhyme was written about him.
And to say he's the first like serial killer in British history.
Right. Which would be, if true, of great interest because we focus a lot on Jack the Ripper as like one of the earliest examples of a serial killer.
Right.
But, to then allege that somebody was doing it like 300 years earlier would be kind of a big deal. And you'd think there'd be more information about this guy out there if he were real.
Especially if he was pulling a muffin on a string and that was the way he killed people. Yeah.
Right. So there's no evidence that he existed, and there's definitely no evidence that he was a muffin-selling serial killer. Interestingly, London's first known serial killer was not Jack the Ripper. It was a woman named Mary Ann Cotton who killed 11 of her own children and 3 husbands so that she could collect insurance money.
Yikes.
There are some people who also have made a link between the Muffin Man and Jack the Ripper. You could substitute Drury Lane for Dorset Lane. But again, Jack the Ripper wasn't using muffins.
That we know of.
Victims that we know of.
Also, that's a stretch. It's like you could take any lane that starts with a D and be like, it's actually this lane.
Yeah. So again, like we're just kind of sitting here in this like misinformation bubble of like, it's really not. It really is just a song about a guy who sells muffins.
That one's so funny because it's so specific with like a name and like an MO.
Right.
And
it adds a lot of seeming credibility to it, right? If you can say, oh, there was actually a serial killer. Here's his name, the time he was operating. He did this weird thing with muffins. And it's like, oh, okay, that sounds believable.
Like facts there. Yeah. In fact.
Like if somebody told you that like at a party or whatever, you'd be like, oh, that's crazy.
Right. And then you Google it and be like, oh.
You'd be like, this guy's not real. What are you talking about?
Thank God for Google.
Next up, another very famous, very classic nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty, which I think, we were talking about it the other day. It's sort of just a weird rhyme in general, and the accompanying imagery is strange too, right? Because nowhere in Humpty Dumpty, the nursery rhyme, does it mention that he was an Eggman.
Right.
Nowhere does it say that. It's not like Humpty Dumpty, the Eggman. It's just the way it's always been shown. I mean, to go over the rhyme, it's Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again.
Did you memorize these or do you have them like pulled up?
The other ones I did read, even though I knew them. This one I decided to memory. I had them up just in case I needed to, but this one I was like, I'm pretty sure I know Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah, that's funny.
I want to do like a line by line breakdown. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Okay, it makes sense. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Sure. All the king's horses and all the king's men. Why are horses getting involved in putting someone back together again.
Yeah. Something going on there.
Also, you just can't do that, right? You just can't put a person back together when they fall.
Unless they're an egg.
Exactly. I think that's probably where the egg bit starts coming in. It's like, well, a person would just die, but an egg would break.
And you could put it back together again, and then it would be fine.
They also never mentioned the yolk, right?
No.
Like, I don't think he falls and then all of his yolk spills out. I think it's just like he's like an empty egg.
Well, they couldn't put him back together again, so, that could be part of it.
Well, I just imagine that's because you have a bunch of horses trying to piece an egg back together.
And the king's men, they're all working together.
Right. Maybe he was hard boiled, and
there we go.
I'm just saying, there's a lot of unanswered questions about Humpty Dumpty. That it's God, when you Google Humpty Dumpty, some of the artwork is really disturbing.
Yeah,
it's kind of frightening. When I was a sophomore in high school, I actually thought I was onto something. I thought Humpty Dumpty was an allusion to suicide.
Oh,
to somebody killing themselves.
I could see that. Although he falls off the wall, he doesn't jump off the wall.
Sure, but I was like, well, it's kind of old timey, right? They weren't as explicit about mental health and like, how they would talk about things. So disappointed to find that no one else online was suggesting that theory.
Not a popular theory.
Not a popular theory. No. One of the more popular ones, though, is referring to the term Humpty Dumpty, which in the 17th and 18th centuries apparently referred to somebody who was overweight and clumsy.
That's so mean.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really mean.
It's like a little bit funny. Like you see like somebody like, stumbling out of the bar. They're a little bit heavy set and they're like, oh, look at this Humpty Dumpty.
It's very British too, I think.
It is very British.
That kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
It's very British. It was also apparently an 18th century drink made by boiling brandy and ale.
Oh, that sounds horrible. Hot beer?
Yeah, I'm not a brandy guy in general. There is apparently a newer version of the Humpty Dumpty drink. We can do this as like our kind of history happy hour segment, right? A little Humpty Dumpty cocktail.
What's in it?
Gin, dry sherry, aperitif, and bitters.
Huh. That sounds okay. I don't know. Yeah. Gin and sherry? I don't know if I've ever really had sherry before.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different versions of this, though, too. Another one has a whole egg in it, which makes sense, actually. You should have an egg in a Humpty Dumpty cocktail nowadays.
Well, not a whole egg. I mean, put in like an egg.
Well, you do the egg whites.
Egg white. Yeah, that kind of cocktail. That would make sense.
Yeah, or the vegan version has like the chickpea.
There's a vegan version of it.
You can do like like instead of doing egg whites, you do like ground up chickpeas. I've had it. You really can't tell the difference.
Really? That's weird.
It's pretty good. Not gonna lie.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, but anyway, some say the explanation behind this could just be that simple. The Humpty Dumpty who falls off the wall was an overweight drunk person who fell over.
And they made a whole rhyme about him that endured for forever. Wow.
Yeah, they were just like, just like a fun little thing they could do. There is a slightly meaner interpretation of it. Not really dark. There's no, I mean, my version of this is the darkest one we're going to get.
Yeah.
But there is one that says maybe this refers to a cannon that fell off a city wall during the English Civil War, which was from 1642 to 1651, which then the king's men couldn't put back together. There's also people who say that it might refer to King Richard III, who reigned for only 2 years from 1483 to 1485. Richard III allegedly had a hunchback and then was defeated by Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. During the battle, people say Richard fell off his horse, the name of which might have been Wall. Again, that's like speculation, hearsay, not really provable.
Yeah. What a horrible name for a horse.
Right.
Anyway, I think of all these theories, I think the canon theory makes the most sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think plausible. it could be like a confluence of all these things, right? Like if you have this term Humpty Dumpty for a drink and for, a mean term for people who are overweight and clumsy, and then this canon falls and you're writing a song about it. you could kind of...
Yeah, that's true.
Right. You could refer to the cannon as a Humpty Dumpty because it's like...
big and bulbous kind of.
It was big and clumsy, kind of like the term we already use. And now they... Oh, that cannon was being a real Humpty Dumpty. Like...
All right. Yeah, so, that's possible.
Yeah, it could have been something like that. There's really no way to know for sure. I did like this one because pretty much every version of it is kind of funny.
Yeah, unless you were King Richard, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, but I don't think he didn't really live to hear it.
True.
He was kind of done for at that point. So
yeah.
I'm always down for making fun of royalty too. Like, you know.
Sure. And he got defeated in battle, so.
So if Humpty Dumpty is making fun of King Richard III, I'm all for it. You know, if there's any lesson to take away from this, if it's fine, everything's fine, right? Everything's fine.
Everything's
don't worry.
Fine.
Your kids aren't singing about plagues. It's not that dark. It's all good. It's all good.
Mm-hmm. Or serial killers or, yeah.
Right. Yeah. We can still sing about the Muffin Man. He's a nice guy. He sells muffins.
Yeah.
He's all right. Humpty Dumpty, the Eggman, they couldn't put him back together. He died. I'm sorry. That's actually, the rhyme is darker than the story behind it.
Yeah. Right. Death.
Just a poor little Eggman sitting on the wall.
He probably should have been up there.
He was an anomaly. There was the only Eggman in the history of England.
And he had to fall.
He didn't make it. Humpty fell so we could run.
Well said.
Well, hey, if you're listening on the regular feed, that's the end of our episode there. So thanks for listening. If you want to dive further into these nursery rhymes, Kalina did an excellent article about them and several others that is available on allthat'sinteresting.com. You can go there, check that out, and some of the other stuff that we've been doing. You know, as usual, feel free to write into the podcast at allthat'sinteresting.com. Follow us on social media, all that good stuff. But if you want a little bit more of this podcast and a little couple perks on the site, you can sign up to be a member at allthat'sinteresting.com/membership. And for those of you who have maybe already done that and are listening here, or who are, you know, about to go and do that, we have an extended version of this podcast episode where we're going to talk about 3 more nursery rhymes. So basically double the content.
And the really good ones too.
For just $5 a month. And with, you know, like hey, look, prices are going up everywhere across the board. Coffee latte at Starbucks, like $7 now. But we're not rising with inflation. $5 a month. For an ad-free experience, dark mode on the website so you can keep reading until the wee hours of the morning without your eyes burning out of their sockets.
Wow, priceless.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe go check it out. Come listen to the other half of this podcast.